What's up, guys? It's Tyler. It's been a minute, but we're back. We got another coilover install video today, and I'm really excited about these. We have Ashley's 2015 all-wheel drive ATS. The Alpha chassis that these cars were built on, phenomenal platform. They handle great out of the box. However, on your non-performance models, like this, which is just a premium luxury edition, the suspension can be a little more compliant. You know, it's for the general public. So we're gonna stiffen it up a little bit. These are based on the Camaro we developed on my 4-cylinder Camaro. And with the damping down, the spring rates are just right. They ride great around town, but you can still hit the track with them. Now this is Ashley's daily, so we're gonna set them up like that. As much as I would love to dump this thing, we're gonna just give it a little bit of healthy wheel gap. Right now, you know, you've got quite a bit. It's up on the lift a little bit, but it's pretty massive. So I already did my measurements. We're gonna get these new hot boys out of the box. We'll set them up. We'll go over setting the preload, figuring out camber, and get them installed good and ready to go. So with that, let's hit the fronts first. All right, so we have the car up in the air. As I always say, you don't need a lift to install coilovers. It makes it a little easier, and we have them at our disposal, so I'm gonna use it. But before we get taking the stock components out, I'm gonna set up these front coilovers, set the preload. We won't set the ride height yet because I'm gonna get the stock strut out. But, you know, we always talk about, especially here in Michigan, the one thing that always sucks is if you wanna say raise your ride height for winter, trying to get these collars unstuck when they've glued themselves to the body is it's real annoying. So if you have anti-seize always works. The problem with anti-seize is because it's such a thick paste, it will pick up rocks and dust and just all sorts of gritty, gross things. So I actually found this WD-40 dry lube. It's what they use for bike chains, things like that. It does a great job of lubricating and staying moist, I suppose, during the winter, and it doesn't get all over your hands. So what I'm gonna do is I ran the bottom mount out, so I've got, you know, this free spinning here. Then I like to set these up now after we've dealt with them for quite a while and have had more experience. I like to set them with a little bit more preload than they come out of the box. So what I'm gonna do here is get this bottom spring perch moving. All right, so as you can see, spring is loose. So what I'm gonna do is take this bottom mount until I start to feel friction. So I'd say right about there. Spring's not going anywhere. Run down the bottom collar until it just touches, and then back it off. Then grab your spanner wrench again, hold your hand on the bottom one so it doesn't move, and then start tightening the top collar. So this is putting some preload on the spring. As we've discussed before, these are linear rate springs, so the rate doesn't change. You can compress this as much as you want, and it's always gonna be an 8 kilograms per millimeter rate. What you're doing when you're setting this preload is more or less setting your bump travel. So there's bump stops in here, and if you've ever hit a really big bump on a set of lowering springs or even some other coilovers, you'll get that slam when the bump stop hits the top and the shock runs out of travel. So by putting preload on the spring, you're actually storing a little bit of energy in it, and you'll have less times where you're slamming that bump stop. So now that this hasn't moved and I've got my 2 spanner wrenches, I'm gonna put those in there. We're almost there. I like to just start with 2 spanner wrenches worth. There are some cars, like some W bodies, might need a little bit more. So that should be good. Yep, we can fit the 2 in there. So then what I'm gonna do is take my dry lube here, loosen up the height adjustment collar there. Now again, I haven't set ride height yet. We're gonna get those out and kind of measure. I took measurements before of the ground to fender distance. So we're gonna shoot for lowering this thing about 1.25 inches, maybe 1.5 inches, we'll see. So now that those are loose, I'm gonna take this dry lube here and just coat the threads. So I'll do one side, flip it over, go ahead and do that again. Now because we're not setting the ride height yet, I'm gonna run this lock ring up. Then hold the top lock ring and snug this bottom one down. And you'll get to there. You don't have to go extra Hulk. That'll do the job. I'm gonna run the height adjustment ring up and down a couple times just to make sure it gets, that lubricant gets covered over all the threads. All right, and there we are. Now obviously you'll do that for both sides, but as with all our coilover videos, I'm gonna do one side of the car, then just repeat for the other. Car's in the air, we've got preload set on the coilovers, so now we need to obviously start disassembling the stock assembly here. So it's only 6 bolts. Sounds easy, sometimes it's not. First, I'm gonna go for the sway bar end link up here. On these ATSs, it's an 18. They can get stuck, and we'll see if this one does. But if an impact doesn't get it off, then you have to use a regular wrench and then a 5 or 6 mil Allen in there and hold it steady. So fingers crossed. Yep, she doesn't want to go. Okay, so since she wouldn't budge, we got the 18 mil wrench on there, 6 Allen. Run it out that way. Remove your sway bar end link, move that off to the side. Now we're gonna work on the knuckle bolts here. You're gonna need a 24 mil and a good impact. If not, you'll need a big breaker bar. Breaker bar it is. All right, and as always, I'm gonna leave them on the end. So with the nuts on the end of the bolt, so you don't mushroom them out, you don't want to be able to not get your bolts through. Take your trusty hammer. Get those loose. Okay. There we go. support the weight of the knuckle. And you can wiggle those boys out. All right. Now that that's loose, I am going to remove this ABS sensor here. So on these, you pinch it towards you. There you go. Line's free. And then last thing you have is your brake line around the back, which is a 10 mil. Get that brake line fitting off. Now your strut's free. And we're gonna move up top. You may or may not still have these little covers there. Kind of nice. Stock bolts are 13 mil. Oh, that came out of the top hat? You gotta be joking me. Yeah. Well, that one's into the nether. And run that one out. So then you'll come down here, make sure you don't pinch any of the lines coming out. And there we are, stock assembly. See, actually one of the studs came out upon removal. This top hat's a little loose. So maybe it was time for an upgrade. Okay, so we have our stock strut assembly out. We'll set our ZZP coilover next to it. Now, this isn't a perfect measurement. However, generally, you can take your measurement from your top hat down to the center of this bolt and do it on the same on both. Now, a stock spring, because it is such a soft spring, is gonna compress quite a bit when you put the weight on it. So you'll wanna go a little bit lower with your coilover because this is gonna shrink. So just eyeballing it, give me a rough measurement of about 17.5. That's at 16 there. If we wanna lower the car 1.5 inches, let's say, I'm gonna go a little bit lower on the coilover. So I'm gonna go 1, 2, and 3. I'm gonna get the height adjustment lock ring taut, but you don't wanna run her down yet. Now, with our ATS, just like all of our coilovers, you have 2 areas for camber adjustment. Your more traditional one is gonna be down here at the knuckle. That's probably what your alignment shop will use. And then up top, you have your camber plate, which has machine marks, so you know where to set it. The one difficult thing about the ATS in particular is the inspection hole through the top of the strut tower is very small. So we had to do a new pillow ball mount on this to make it a little bit thinner so you can still access it. Now, because our local alignment shop that does these, not our track alignments, they like to do all the adjustment down here. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna set this top plate up with camber fully this way. So you will need your 5 mil Allen wrench, so I will grab that. You'll just loosen all these up. We'll loosen these up. Get it full. And I'm actually backwards here. So I'm gonna spin, nope. I'm gonna spin that around. And like I said, we're gonna go full positive camber on the top plate. Okay. Now reinstallation is just as easy as taking it out. So we're gonna slide it in through the bottom here. All right, so we'll feed that through. I got some fender washers here. Get them snug down so I can support the weight. Then go ahead and tighten those up. We've got the top secured. Now you just need to come back here. Now this is one situation where having the car on jacks makes it a little bit easier. But we need to get that knuckle back in, which doesn't want to go. Okay. There we go. Grab one of your bolts, run it through the top there. All right, so I've got the bolts in. Gonna get that bottom one through. And the top one through there. Get your nuts back on. Woo! We've got those through. I've transferred over my clip from the stock strut. Hold your ABS sensor there. Get that reclipped through. Then your brake line fitting. Make sure everything else is clipped. Tighten that down. And lastly, you have your sway bar link. If I had the nut. There it is. All right, we are assembled. Now it's time to put the wheel back on and see where she sits. Okay, so stock ride height after they've settled, because once you have the car up and down, those stock springs take a minute to settle, was 26 and 5/16 inches from ground to fender. That's where we're at now. So, time to go down. A good way to measure once you have the car up is get your tape measure, put it in the bottom, and get it flush against the side. And we have 1 and 5/16 before you hit the bottom of the damper. So I'll go ahead and loosen this up again and get to spinning. Okay, we're making progress, slowly but surely. Now this doesn't correlate exactly 1-to-1. Like if you lower this an inch, you're likely gonna get more than an inch out at the knuckle because you have a little bit of space. After all the adjusting, I got it where I wanted it, about 1.25 inches from the stock height. So we will just wrap up this side real quick. Just remember all your connections will need to get tightened up. Because this side is so much lower than the other, I can't get the sway bar link in yet. So once you do the other side and you have both sides free, the sway bar can freely go up and down. You can go ahead and adjust that. But just make sure all your lock rings are tight. That one's good. I made sure to double check that. I'll go ahead and tighten down these knuckle bolts. For the final time. Okay, those are good and tight. I'm not gonna put the wheel on because I have to do the sway bar link, but since we know that this is where we want the other side, just take a measurement. We set our preload to the same on both sides, so your spring length here is gonna be the same. Take your tape measure, try and get an accurate measurement between the two lock rings. We're gonna have 13/16 of an inch. So what we'll do then is run over to our other coilover, run this up. While we're over here, I figured I would tease these to you guys. They should be ready just in time for the winter. But we've got our ZZP Coilover covers. What these are really nice for, in the winter, you're in Michigan, it gets nasty. So once you have these set, you can go ahead, loop this around, and obviously I would want that lock ring done. But you tighten that up, and it covers your damper shaft. So you don't have to worry about all that gook and gunk getting in there. Now we do have the dust boots in there, but these are a nice protective layer. So hopefully you don't have trouble down the line. We'll have them in a couple different sizes for our different coilovers. But we're gonna run this up. Let me grab my tape. We know the other side was 13/16 between the two spring perches. We've got a little more to go. And that should be right on the money. So I'll just get that snug. And like I said, other side is as easy as the first. You'll just wanna make sure you do your camber before it gets in there. But as you can see from the other top hat, because the way we designed the pillow ball, you can still get in there and adjust your camber on the fly, which is great. So now that I've shown you how to do the front, let's move on to the back. Now, similar to the Cobalt and the Sonic and the Cruze, the ATS and the Camaro, they both use what they call a divorce setup, meaning that the spring and the damper are separate. Now there are advantages and disadvantages to this. The biggest difference to you guys is gonna be just how you set them up. So on a McPherson style where it's all in one, like the front, you set the spring preload on the damper, and then the damping adjustment is on there as well. So these are gonna be divorced. So you've got your height adjustment collar here. That's gonna sit on top of your spring, and those are gonna sit in the buckets in the suspension. And then your damper preload is gonna be dependent on where you set your spring height. So just like we did with the front, I'm just gonna rinse these down with a little bit of dry lube. You won't set these up particularly until you get them in the car. But just get some of that going. And same for the high-low adjusters. Now I'm gonna preset these before we put them in. I recently did some readjustment on my Camaro, so I know about where they sit. That car is almost tuck and tire in the rear. We don't want to go quite that low. So like I said with the front, because your spring is so far inboard, adjustments at your high-low kit are going to make quite a bit more difference on your actual height of the fender to tire gap. So, just guessing, we're going to see what that sits at. We'll start there, which is right at a 1/2 inch. So I'm going to snug that down. Same on the other side. Make sure they're sitting the same, and you're good to go. So now we need to start working on removing everything here. On these newer cars, they have a lot more trim panels than some of the old units we're used to working on. So remove all the bolts there. There's 3 of them. These 2 ones on the side are small. They're T15 Torx. So just go ahead and remove those 2. Okay, so now that I can move this fabric, there are going to be 2 15 mil bolts up top here. We'll need to remove those eventually, but first I'm going to raise this up so I can start getting the bucket down below. Again, you'll just continue working around, getting all the plastic clips out. These trim piece removal tools really do come in handy, especially on GM cars. So I got the one side off, and the other. She was apparently missing one. No big deal. Set those off to the side so you don't lose them. Okay, so a series of events here. What needs to happen? The spring obviously seats in this control arm. You've got your main nut back there. You've got one up here, and then you've got one that holds the shock. So what I'm gonna do, loosen this one up, loosen the rear one up, take out the shock completely, then we can move that down. Now, on these Alpha chassis cars, it's really imperative that you get an alignment right after because your camber control is back here. There's lots of toe adjustment in the back, and you can easily really screw that up. So we'll get working on that. Not completely necessary, but I'm gonna go ahead and remove this sway bar link so I can get it out of the way, so I can get to that first bolt there. All right, so with that out, I can move that up and away so I can get to our bolt. I'm gonna set that aside so I don't lose it. 18 mil on this first bolt. And on the other side, I believe you have a 15. So you'll wanna hold that steady as you get this side loose. Okay. And we will want to get these loose because you can see there's pressure putting down on here. So I'll grab a exhaust jack here in a bit. All right, so when removing and loosening up this rear bolt, you'll notice that there is a paint mark. There should be a paint mark on the front here, and that is the alignment mark from the factory. So when you're putting it back together, try and line that up as close as you can. It won't be perfect, obviously, since we're lowering the car, but we'll go ahead and loosen this guy up. Okay, that should be enough for it to move. Yep, okay. 18 on both sides here. All right. So now that that is free, we can go back up to the top, grab that 15. All right, so we'll get in here. One of those off. Woo! Wow. It's dusty. Whoever at GM decided to use carpet in these things, I'll never understand. So you may want to cut yourself an access hole if you'd like. Otherwise, I should be able to get up in here without any extra trimming. Just a face full of dust.
Ugh. I'm hoping that's all it is.
Yeah, me too. Okay, so we'll get that out. We'll compress it down. Pull out the stock unit there. Okay, you'll want to set that aside because we will need it in a few. Now that we have our nuts and bolts loose here, now your stock spring is considerably longer than the new coilover spring. So this is under a good bit of tension, which is pulling both of these down. So what you're going to want to do, if you can, if you have a spring compressor that you can get on these, that's probably your safest route. But what I'm going to do here is I've got our exhaust jack and I'm going to line it up, and there's a little nub here. So I'm going to raise this and catch that nub so this doesn't go anywhere. And then as soon as it starts putting pressure on, I can see that this moved, and now our camber bolt here can slide out. So we'll slide that out. And then what I'm gonna do is hold the spring and start to lower the jack. Now you could use a regular jack if that's all you'll have, but you wanna make sure that you somehow get it into one of these crevices, because if you don't, the jack could slip, this could go, and you could have a bad situation. So we'll lower that down. Take tension off the spring as it's coming down. All right. So now that the tension's off the spring and it's moving, I can move this out of the way, get the control arm down, and your bucket's free there. So you can see considerable difference in the height. So now going back together. If you remember, a couple minutes ago, we preset the height here. This is just a complete guess. I could be wrong, but I think that's gonna be about where we want it. So you have your top rubber one there, there's rubber here, so you don't get any spring noise. And then you also have your rubber cup on the bottom. So, as we just did, we'll go ahead and get that seated. And as you can see, we're already 90% of the way there. I'm gonna bring back my jack. I'm gonna run this up, catch it in that nub like we did before. And then as you work it up, just make sure that everything is seated. I'll go up. Oops. I've got it on the nub up there. All right, so we're good there. We'll get this rolling. Grab your camber bolt. Work it back through. You can move this side to side so you can get that through there. Now, obviously we are not completely reassembling here. You want to make sure that you don't forget this alignment plate. And here's a good time to show you. You've got your blue mark there, blue mark there. This plate keyways into the actual bolt. So you can turn it and line up the blue to the blue. Now we're not gonna fully tighten this down because we don't know that this is our final ride height, but we've got everything in place. So from here, we need to install the damper. Okay, so with our ZZP damper for the coilovers, you do need to transfer over your stock top mount. So you got a 15 mil nut at the top. All right, so if you can't grip the shaft because of this boot, what you can do is get a ratcheting wrench or a regular wrench, and then an adjustable. Get the adjustable over the little nub there. There we go. That's loose. We'll take that off. So we're reusing our stock top mount here. And what you want to do is take your included washer, slip that on, slip this on, and the only orientation that you want to pay attention to is your damping adjustment knob here. You'll want that on the same plane as the top mount. Install your new nut. That's not a 15, because why wouldn't it be? Ugh. All right, there we are, we're nice and tight. If you don't have an impact, you can also use an Allen wrench in the top and then tighten it down there. But we want to just make sure we're tight. Move the old one off to the side. Now, like I was talking about earlier, because this is a divorce setup, you're setting the spring preload and the shock preload separately. So when you've got it in the bucket here, you can see it's pretty tight. But I'm gonna raise it up a few mil. So just like I did in the front, set that preload. And then we get to reinstalling. So your top mount goes exactly how it did before. So run this up just for ease of installation. Slip it on in. And wow, that GoPro is hot.
Oh, yeah. Running at 4K.
Watch Tyler struggle 2022. Get under there. Okay. Get that on the studs up there. Get your nuts started by hand. Grab your 15 again. and run them home. You get a bunch of dust in your lungs. Okay. Wow, that thing's dusty. Yeah, right? Okay, now if you want to come over here. So now that we're in, you can go ahead and move this on down until you get to the point where you can't spin it anymore. And then just grab the shock body, and just like we did in the front, go ahead and twist it down. And there we are. All right, so then get your bolt through. And this side has no nut on the other side. So we're gonna just run that home with an 18. Now again, no need to tighten anything up yet because we still have no idea where this puppy's sitting. So I'm gonna clear the way, get the wheel on, and we'll do some checking. All right, we're looking pretty good. So on the rears, I had stock height was 26.5. We went 1.25 inches in the front. So we want a little bit less. All right. So the worst part about coilovers, up and down, adjusting. But like I said earlier, once you have the one side set and you know that's where it's at, just copy it, measure, apply to the other side. So back up we go. So now the one downfall of this style is you kind of have to remove the whole control arm out again to adjust that high-low adjuster. You can do it up there, get the spanner wrenches in and start working at it. However, then you're ending up putting way more spring preload than you're gonna want. And spring preload in the back affects ride height quite a bit. So I'm just gonna get it loose enough. We wanted about 1/2 inch lower. So I had this at about 1/2 inch. I'm gonna go to 1/4. Looks about good. Snug it on up. Slip it back in, and back up we go. There we are. Put your camber bolt back there. Put the nut on. We're not tightening anything down, but you want to at least get it close. So then obviously, because you've changed the spring height, and don't forget, you want to preload this a little bit. Go there. Move it up a couple mil, and thread this back on up. Get it right in the middle. $25.5. So we got a little bit more in the rear than the front. I think that'll be about perfect. All right, here we are. ATS is all done. A couple days later, got the car aligned, got it sitting how we want it. As you can see, it's pretty low. We went a little lower than we originally expected, but I like the way it sits. She likes the way it sits. Rides very nice. I set up the initial damping at 8 in the front and 10 in the rear. Now, as I've explained in our other coilover videos, your damping settings are completely up to you and what you want to do. So if you're like Ashley and you want to just drive around and look really nice and then maybe have some performance gains when she's ready to take some turns, you can keep them soft. If you are strictly a track car and you want to get more oversteer out of the rear, crank that up. If you just want a stiffer ride overall, you can crank them up as well. I think it's sitting pretty. If you guys have any questions about our ATS coilovers or any of our coilovers, feel free, shoot me an email, tyler.v@zzperformance.com or customer service@zzperformance.com, and we'll catch you next time.